A brand new house should cost $25,000, a new car $1,800, an iPhone $15, but that future was stolen from us. In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I talk with Matt McDonagh, an AI advisor and investor who came up on Wall Street about where all the technological progress actually went. Because the uncomfortable math shows that although we invented computers, the internet, robots, and spaceships, today a 35-year-old with a partner and 2 kids is worse off than in the 1970s. Matt's answer is that they've been printing away the gains from our technological progress before they ever reached the common people. And now AI, the biggest deflationary force to ever exist, is about to make that theft impossible to hide. Because when the money printer meets AI, Matt thinks there's one asset that will go through the roof, and it's the only thing you cannot print more of. Guess which one? If you're enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks a lot. Now let's dive into this episode. All right, Matt McDonagh, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Hey, Bram, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I really enjoy your content online, especially your big ideas around Bitcoin and AI and what the future holds. And so I thought it would be really interesting to jam about that, and maybe also directly open with your thesis, which I think we can summarize in 4 sentences, which is Bitcoin decentralizes wealth, AI decentralizes intelligence, AI is deflationary, so central banks will print against it. And that drives Bitcoin up right as AI agents come online and start using it. So maybe just to start this conversation, maybe you can walk me through that chain, because I think, if you're right, then everything that's about to happen in the next decade kind of follows from that. Maybe one thing to add, and I wonder what you think. A lot of, classic economists, they say, deflation is bad, but they never finish the sentence, right? They never finish the sentence, which in my opinion, the full sentence is deflation is bad in a debt-based monetary system, which is actually why they're saying it. So I also wonder what you think of that and if that ties into your bigger thesis.
Well, that's great. We're starting with the really light concepts. Basically, AI is an engine for decentralization. It's an engine to basically, we've got 2 forces that are happening in all systems. Energy is either being pulled to the center of the system or it's being pulled to the edges. And with central bank printing, we're seeing an incredible centralization of wealth. And with corporate America and all of these institutions that we've built, whether they're universities or think tanks, we've sort of centralized thinking and intelligence as well. So we centralized money and we centralized wealth building in feedstock, which is obviously intellect. Enter AI, right? AI is an engine for decentralization because now suddenly one individual person, they can learn on their own. They don't need to pull down from a centralized chamber. They could use several different APIs for AI. They can also summon local AI and use inference, so they don't even need to make an AI call. And so locally, you can pull down information and start to build decentralized information of your own. And then you could use that information to build an information product or launch a company or launch an advisory service or go teach someone else what you just learned, right? So there's an infinite number of ways that AI is going to give individuals the ability to generate intelligence. That's also going to add something called, to your teasing point, deflation, right? Because suddenly if every single input across the economy is easier to summon and easier to work with and easier to pass along and transform into the next value chain, prices start to come down, right? The surface area of what's possible becomes bigger and more competitors enter the market as a result of that. And technology in general just starts to push down prices. And look at TVs, right? A flat screen, a TV that was 42 inches used to cost $2,500, and now you can get it for like $89 on Amazon. So that's a place where technology is driving incredible deflationary force. So AI is that on steroids. It's the ability to lower the input costs across the entire value chain. And so this is on its surface, at least for us consumers, quite a good thing. You teased, like, economists never really finish the story when they treat deflation like it's a boogeyman. And you teased out that if the engine inside the economy is debt-based, then we continuously need more surface area to retire and pay back the last debt. And so if we have prices start to deflate, there's the fear that we won't have enough surface area to cover the debt and finance it because no one's paying back debt. Everyone's rolling it and pushing it down the road. And so that can cause the system to lock up. If we don't continuously print more money from these monetarist standpoint, they're afraid that there's not going to be enough surface area and the gears are going to jam and the whole thing is going to collapse and we're all just going to fall out of our castles in the sky. But the reality is we are building real things of real value. So I think that last thing is not really going to happen. But AI is going to cause, I think, some responses, right? If you've got deflationary forces entering the economy, the central bankers who are worried about what I just talked about are going to start acting in certain ways. And namely, that's going to be printing. They're going to create more surface area. They're going to print more money. They're going to inject money in all sorts of intricate ways. So AI is a deflationary force and it's a decentralizing force. But it is also going to provoke a response from the central bankers that's likely going to be inflationary to the money supply. And that's obviously going to have an impact on Bitcoin. That's a big part of the Bitcoin thesis in and of itself. It's all the actions that central bankers do and they intervene and they try to get involved in systems that are far too complicated for any one group of people to try to influence. And yet they do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I don't want to go too esoteric unless you want us to.
We can get weird, yeah.
Yeah. But what I find so interesting is that, when you just think about the progression of technology, I kind of visualize that as, there's always more energy that's packaged in a smaller package, right? So let's say you had 10 people working on a field before and they would, work the whole field in 7 days, right? When they had a tractor, they could do it in 3 days or whatever. Right?
Yeah,
and
yields go up, costs go down. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So same as with the book printing press, right? 10 monks writing one edition of the Bible in, I don't know,
Enter
6
Gutenberg.
months.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And then Gutenberg changed the game, right?
Yeah. So this is always what happens, and like every new technology also builds upon the previous one, I would say, or at least lessons of the previous one, if it's unrelated, right? Like book printing press is not necessarily related to automotive, right? But I think you get that.
But you know
point,
what?
right? So
it accelerated the movement of information, and that did have feed through to automotive and everything else. So I agree. It all does touch each other in one way or another.
Yeah, that is very true, right? So either information gets shared further and wider, and thus education, more people have inspiration to create new things, etc. So like the technological innovation goes faster, but when you think about fiat money, right? I think these are the two most competing forces, by the way, in the video of Lynn Alden, Broken Money. It's really well visualized, right? So technological progression drives prices down, which is deflationary, right? But fiat money by definition is inflationary, so they kind of like battle with each other. Where I wanted to go is that I feel a lot of the times that fiat money is kind of like holding us back, right? Because there is a certain centralized force that is kind of controlling the pace, let's say, right? Although, if we talk about this train ain't stopping, there will also be a point where they cannot really, control that pace anymore. But I feel like fiat money makes us move slower than technological progression actually would do.
And that's only been true in maybe the last 15 or 20. I think you're right. But that's only been true in the last 15 or 20 years. As you know, we used to be linked to gold and to other heavier instruments, atomic instruments. And then we unburdened ourselves because we actually wanted to turn into a credit-based economy. And by the way, even though I'm a hardcore Bitcoiner, I did come up on Wall Street, and I have a lot of respect for the fact that like the reason why we have so much wealth and abundance right now is because we did have a frothy capitalist era from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and through the 90s and early 2000s. It also just got, after 1970, really 1913, obviously we know what happened there. And we started, we created an institution that didn't have direct accountability to the American taxpayer, the American people, the American president, the Fed I'm talking about. And these central banking institutions started fractionalizing money and basically creating more surface area to invent money and to create a put underneath the economy where they could just keep printing more money and essentially push all of the prices inside of the economy up. And this is, I think from their perspective, the charitable way to put it is that it was a form of life support and for the entire global economy, and that it was going to ensure a certain base minimum level of economic activity. But I think the reality is they were creating slush funds and vehicles and ways for them to enrich themselves and then bail out industries when things didn't go well from them, go skiing in Davos and then pick winners and losers in terms of industries, and then come back and place their bets, and then come back a year later and talk about how much money they made.
Bitcoin in self-custody is the revolution, but as we've recently seen with the cold card exploit, you could have done everything right and still fall victim to faulty software. When I realized I never had the proper setup, even though I thought I had, I knew I needed help, and that's how I found the Bitcoin way. Their security experts taught me how to self-custody my Bitcoin the right way with air-gapped wallets, backups, running a node, the full architecture. None of their customers were affected by the cold card exploit because they had the proper setup. Bitcoin is way less stressful when it's not a solo mission. That's why I partner with the Bitcoin Way, aiming to help 1,000 people get a 100% self-custody setup so they can enjoy the same sovereignty as I do. You can book a free intro call today with the Bitcoin Way team at thebitcoinway.com/Bram. You'll end up with a bulletproof setup, more skills, and a lot more confidence. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram. Yeah, I mean, that's also something I would say if I would be leading probably the most brilliant scam that's ever invented, right? Like exporting your own debasement across the world. But yeah, I always use this example.
It's good work if you can get it.
That's true.
Yeah.
I always use this example of, like, let's say, what is that? I think it's like the 1920s, when you had that kind of like era where there was a harder money standard, right? And all these ideas of the future, right? Like this meme of they promised us flying cars, but this is where we are. Like the flying cars idea came from that era, right? So from the perspective of the people that were living that day on that hard money standard, like that is what 80 years in the future would actually look like, right? And I think that also really inspires me with regard to Bitcoin. Like, if Bitcoin actually gets more adopted and it's, actually aligned with these deflationary technologies such as AI, we can actually speed up toward the future, because they thought we would have flying cars and all we got was brain rot on our supercomputer in our pocket.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, in a sense, they're stealing the technological gains by printing the money and filling that surface area in. And what should be happening is prices should be deflating. The value of goods should be going up at the same time. Homes should be $25,000 brand new. Cars should be $1,800 brand new. Like iPhone should be $15, but not because the plan is subsidizing it, because we're actually able to like atomically print it. Kilo energy should be 0.00001 pennies per kilowatt hour. Like we've had all the technology to do this. I think somewhere along the way we lost our way. There was a real attack made on energy in general. There were psychological operations against nuclear, and there were things done to try to make us afraid of generating electricity. And then they use climate to try to make us afraid of, emissions and all of that jazz. And then their green solutions are these windmills, which are actually incredibly inefficient and do require a great deal of oil, ironically, to lubricate the turbine. So they're not like an oil-free solution. They drink oil, those bad boys. And then, that we buy them from China. And I mean, the whole thing is a farce. So ultimately, I think that, to your point, AI is a great tool, and it's also going to cause, I think, an issue where they're going to start printing money because they're feeling the deflation in the economy. And that's a good time for a vehicle like it's almost kismet that we, around the same time, invented AI, which is going to be an ultimate deflationary force, at the same time that we invented Bitcoin, which is an absolutely scarce container. And frankly, it's the only thing that could, for a long period of time, hold value if AI starts to derive incredible deflationary energy into the economy.
Yeah, so I think that the essence of your thesis and what we're talking about is that, other technologies that progressed and gave us an increase in productivity, they helped us along the way, but I'm always thinking like, we could have been way further, right? And this is because, and let me know if you agree,
Sure.
Deflation is basically increased productivity makes for deflation, i.e., the prices go down. But how can you measure increased productivity in a money losing its value, right? Like you want something that is stable to actually price whatever the gains are that you make in productivity. But it seems that we've lived through these other technologies still okay. We all love, our faster cars and the internet and the mobile phone. Like we're all happy with it. And I think we don't really see what we have potentially missed. But listening to your thesis and reading your stuff online, it seems like AI is just something that has a way faster pace. Plus, it is also so geopolitically important that there's also different kinds of strategies, right? Like the US is very, I would say, capitalistic, right? I'm doing air quotes, capitalistic in their approach. You pay per token. There's all these IPOs, there's centralized companies, etc. And the funny or weird or extremely interesting thing, in my opinion, is that China is going for a totally different approach, right? They're open sourcing and doing like local models. And I didn't think about this a lot, so I really wonder what you think. But for me, it's kind of like the winner takes all, right? You need to learn from usage of your models to eventually achieve AGI, and then it's kind of like a winner takes all. So I kind of feel that China is just open sourcing just to dump all these models and information gathering ways all across the world to just learn. And America is kind of still holding on to, again, air quotes, this capitalistic approach, because they also need to prop up their stock market. I think that's one part that is very important there. So yeah, what do you think about this divergence? Are you seeing the same, and how much will this actually accelerate even further? Like, are we at top speed, or is this just the beginning?
We're definitely not at top speed. We'll start there. One, because we are seeing acceleration across so many different curves. To your point, there are different frontiers. We have the Western frontier, we have the Chinese frontier, we have the frontier of open source, and then we have hardware that's continuously getting better. And so that's pushing where the curve is and where the envelope is. And then we have another, what used to be a bottlenecked curve, which is data. Famously, although we've already, digested the internet 5,000 times over, how is the AI going to get smarter? There's only so many different ways. Well, then we used AI and other machines to build data factories, synthetic data factories that are building data streams that look and taste exactly like real data. So we've created an endless fountain of data. Anyway, so long story short, now we can create digital twins of entire universes and simulate outcomes and walk things forward. And so talk about a random number generator, right? Like, build a universe, run it forward for a million millennia, and then count the molecules, and that's how you secure your Bitcoin phrase. That's how you secure your Bitcoin vault, right? Talk about pure entropy. Yeah. So, long story short, the hardware curve is accelerating. The software curve is the place where we've seen a lot of the traditional growth, and that's because we have so many different labs that are being infused with so much money right now. That's one of the, like I said, I could talk smack about all this money printing, but one of the advantages are all the money chasing these IPOs and all the energy that's being dumped into these labs. So, long story short, I'm actually quite happy for it. And you said something like, "Is this like the last race?" That's the name of an article I wrote recently. So I hope you're paraphrasing and not stealing. No, I'm just joking. Because I think you're exactly right. Like there was the cost of labor, the cost of capital, and the cost of energy. And the cost of capital is a lever that you can pull kind of on your own. You can print more money, print less money, but we're in a kind of an interesting game where you've got opponents, other countries that they can also print money. And if you inflate your supply too much to try to help your exports, then we could sniff that out. Currency wars start. So it's kind of like a zero-sum game. Plus, we've been playing this game for a very, very, very long time. So there's not a lot of plus or minus gains to be had there. So the only two levers that we could really eke out alpha is the cost of labor and the cost of energy. Well, with AI, essentially, the cost of energy is now driving the cost of labor, because we're able to build an autonomous labor layer using ones and zeros. And so, to the whole last race point, whoever can bring the levelized cost of energy in their country down low enough, fast enough, and then build enough compute, and then layer enough labs and get enough value chains going. And we got to start doing essentially right now, when we build AIs, we're doing these very expensive billion-dollar training runs. and then we're burning these weights in, and then we're saying, hey, the new model's here. It's, GPT-7, woo, we're here. But then they have to go work and start cooking the next one. Heisenberg in the back has to start cooking up the next one. And it doesn't continuously learn. The next trick we're going to add is the ability for, based on interactions with the users and based on changes to the world model and all these other things, GPT-7 will just become GPT-8 as you're talking to it. And so that kind of continuous learning is going to be very, very, very revolutionary in terms of accelerating things. And then one last thing I'll leave you with. So Ray Kurzweil, brilliant scientist. He invented optical character recognition. I think he works at Google as like the chief dreamer. Brilliant guy. He's one of the preeminent thinkers and writers on the singularity. He talks about science and technology. And he's the first person to ever tease them apart for me, but it does make sense. And he's basically like, look, science and technology are involved in a dance. You gain additional clarity on some scientific concept, and then you use that to build a better microscope. And then you use that more enhanced microscope to drill down further into biology. And then you learn a better scientific concept, and then you use that to build a better microscope. But that's a simplified version. There are, earlier we went from printing presses to something completely unrelated. The reality is all of these surface areas can touch each other. One of the problems has been finding where they touch each other and then figuring out the smartest way to bring that information out and bring it to the new domain. Enter AI. AI is a beast when it comes to just looking through data sets and figuring out patterns and connections and pulling them in together. So this is a story I love to tell. If you think about it, okay, we used to be in a valley, just sitting around a campfire, and our entertainment / our memory for the tribe was like the eldest person. And their IO input output was pretty slow, and the memory would degrade towards the end. And then eventually like the line would get them, and there goes the computer. And then the second oldest person becomes the oldest person. And then that's your computer. Then eventually we figured out how to write. And then we were able to store that information. We didn't need the old man anymore as much. Thank goodness. Then we figured out, how, to your point, printing press, and then we could push information out faster. Then we figured out the radio, and we were able to start to push information and pull it. That was the first internet. It was like an analog internet. It's still really cool. I still geek out thinking about the radio. And the ham radios are really important in any kind of disruptive event, right? It's really nice to be able to talk to people on the other side of the planet. Okay, so the radio let us get two-way talking, but you couldn't store anything on the radio. It was just kind of, you had to be there. Maybe you could hook it up to tapes and bake it, but there was no file storage on the radio. Then out comes the internet, right? Now it's the radio on steroids. We can talk to each other back and forth. We can create artifacts. We can work on them together. Oh man, how's it going to get any better than that? Then we bake AI. And then we create these agents. And now we've got these entities. So we used to be listening to the old man around the campfire. Now we can simulate an old man, and we could ask him about the history of Rome and how it came to be this way. So so what's all that about? Well, the dance between science and technology now has a third partner, AI. And that partner is coming in, and it's figuring out different ways for them to work together. Hey, did you know that there's actually a connection between this one? No, I didn't even. Okay, great. Here's an interesting way to pull it across. Here's some interesting places to connect it. So back to the earlier point, how we started this conversation, what are the relationships between AI and Bitcoin, and where are we going from here? I think ultimately where we're going from here is AI is going to bring incredible wealth into the world, and Bitcoin is going to be one of those buckets that takes a lot more of that value than fiat ends up capturing it, because more and more people are going to observe the problems of fiat, which are innumerate, but mainly it's what I just said at the beginning of my diatribe, which is I can print, you can print, they can print, and we kind of have to have a print off with each other, which is a problem.
Yeah. For me, it's so interesting how decentralization and centralization also kind of come together in AI, right? We talked about the difference in approach with the US and China, which is obviously similar to centralized fiat money and decentralized Bitcoin. When I think about when you say the cost of intelligence is collapsing, what does that mean for the average person, their job, their savings, all the stuff they are now thinking about in their lives, like their rent or whatever. I wrote an article. I don't know the title anymore, but it was really all about how accelerated AI will eventually just help you copy everything and thus also open source everything, right? Like I once had the example of like, I don't have an aluminium 3D printer, but I can already 3D scan this whole thing, this probably $50 water, Stanley water bottle. I can already 3D scan it with my phone, all the elements and all that stuff. I can use AI to actually define all these elements. And if I have an aluminium printer, I can actually print it, and then I just throw up the design on the internet and it spreads everywhere, and then everyone has their own Stanley cup, right? And that is just, I think, just a very basic example, but we're already seeing it just with, let's say, paper knowledge, just general knowledge, right? Obviously, a design like this is also knowledge, right? But my bigger idea is that everything will just be copied ad infinitum, right? And therefore, it becomes cheaper. So I think that connects to what you're saying, like the cost of intelligence is collapsing. It's kind of also like the cost of information, right? So I kind of see AI as this information synthesis machine, which gives me the intelligence. Well, if all the information is already out there, we can just basically create anything eventually, even open source hardware models, open source hardware with all these basic elements that people use. So I kind of think that's where it's gonna go. But how do we capture that value, right? If maybe to tie it back to the beginning, if not only people perhaps are a little bit lost as to where this is going, like some people think about ChatGPT still as like a fun chat, or sometimes I do an analysis with Grok on X and people are like, you're a retard because you're using AI for this. And I'm like, it is just information synthesis, like I am doing in my head, but it's already at a bigger scale. So for me, AI is not a 10x or 100x, it's probably 100,000 or 1,000,000x, just from my own experience. So what does this look like, this direction for just general people and their job and what their money is worth, and what they can actually eventually buy with that money? If the money is infinite and everything we can build is infinite, it seems like a very weird situation.
Yeah. Well, all good points. I think that life ultimately comes down to two motions: exploration and exploitation. You're looking around for what you want to have for lunch, or maybe you're looking around for the next business you want to start, or you want to look around for the next romantic partner, but it's exploration. And then eventually, once you find something interesting, then you double down, you experiment, you run some sorties, and then eventually you figure out a strategy that works, and then you exploit. And that's from reinforcement learning, that's from agent training. And again, you were like, how are we going to translate this incredible power into like value in the hands of the end user, and how do we make sure that like it doesn't just end up in the hands of 3 or 4 model houses in the center of the economy, and we're all just like bowing down to the foundation. And I think that it goes back to those two motions, exploration and exploitation, right? So for instance, I use chat, and I also use agents, right? Chat is a great surface if you want to have a conversation, and you can have threaded conversations about different things. And so I have one conversation where I'm just kind of talking about, generally speaking, where I am in life and what's going on around me, what I'm trying to navigate toward. And that's just in a local thread on my computer. That's not with any of the model houses. And it's a slightly less powerful model because I've got a decent MacBook here, but it's not like, I don't have 15 GPUs hog-tied together. So I'm not running like Quen, the latest Quen model, but it's good enough. And it's GPT OSS. And so that's for like personal planning. And then I have other models that I use for essentially like planning workflows, planning networking events, things of that nature. And I use a harness called Codex by OpenAI. And then inside there, you use different agents that have different basically different strengths, different thinking levels, and different cost points. And then essentially it becomes a great tool to do those two things, right? To explore, to figure out what you're interested in, and then to start to express yourself. And so the motion I would give anyone who's listening to this, who's thinking like, okay, how do I actually like apply this in my life? Find something that you are interested in, but you don't know much about yet, right? Learn about it using AI and other sources. Document the learning journey, because people just want to like see what other people are up to, see what your world looks like. So being vulnerable and exposing yourself as you're learning something is actually going to resonate with a lot of people out there. You don't need to go and be the best at it. Like there's already people who are great at it. We love to watch people who are just 1 or 2 levels above us because that's actually motivational. So anyway, you could learn something, you can record the journey as you're learning it, then you could pick an experiment, something that you want to build, like a small app, or maybe you want to start painting, or maybe you want to write a nonfiction book, or pick your journey, right? And then you can start working on it, and then again document the creating in public. Now, the advantage of documenting the creation in public is you're also pre-building your audience. Whatever you're baking, whatever you're making, at the end you're going to want to try to be successful, and you're going to want it in the hands of people. And it's kind of cool to like pre-bake an audience by talking to them in the first place. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but what I would say is, use your tools to figure out more about yourself, so you can figure out what is interesting to you. And then, it doesn't have to be a side hustle that you launch right away. It could be a learning journey, maybe 1 or 2 learning journeys, until you bump into something that you're like, hey, you know what? I like this. It's kind of unique, and I have a talent for it. And then that's when you can lean in and say, hey, chat, how do I make a business out of this? And then that's when you can have a really interesting conversation.
Every Bitcoiner hits this moment. You need cash, maybe for a house deposit, an emergency, or a tax bill, and you're staring at your stack thinking, do I really want to sell this? Here's the thing, you don't have to. You can borrow against your Bitcoin instead, so there's also no taxable event and your stack can keep on stacking. This is where Firefish comes in, a peer-to-peer marketplace for Bitcoin-backed loans. And Firefish is not a lender. They built a protocol that makes this all possible, which is exactly why they never, ever have to touch your Bitcoin. During your loan, your Bitcoin sits in an on-chain multisig secured by open source code. You can find offers for different amounts, durations, and rates at firefish.io. And when you decide to get a loan, you can use code BRAM to get 30% off your first loan's fees. That's firefish.io and code BRAM. If this all plays out and we're going faster and faster and faster, and at time of recording, it's August 20. We've had 2 very interesting days in Bitcoin where Scott Bessent is doing not QE and not yield curve control to kind of like curb the long end of the US Treasury. So, even when talking about all of this stuff that we're talking about, there's a parallel thing happening, right? Which is just the infinite debasement of the dollar and the loss of trust in even being able to repay back this debt. Well, repay back the interest, let alone the principal on the debt, right? So that is kind of happening in parallel. That's also, what I alluded to with this approach in the US, where they need to have, big IPOs. I saw today Anthropic is eyeing same size IPO as SpaceX, which recently bought Cursor, right? So they're all in this, AI play.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff going on. We know fiat money debasement is, I would say, mathematically assured. So if all of this plays out, what does the sequence look like for Bitcoin over the next decade? Like how do you see this evolve? What maybe will be kind of like Bitcoin's real moment where I'd say a new cohort of people finally understand what absolute scarcity means in a world of infinite creation with AI?
So the cheeky but still totally legitimate answer is a lot depends on the speed and severity of the central bankers' reaction to the forces of deflation from AI coming into the market. So we will see kind of how viciously they print. Now, I think you also teased out that the bond market is what's currently giving Scott Bessent and the rest of the central bankers the most to think about, and they're known as the smartest in the room. And when the bond market decides that they're going to make it expensive for you to borrow money, and you're the U.S. government and you're borrowing trillions and constantly, and they're towards the short end of the curve. I mean, we used to borrow at 30s all the time. Now a lot of our duration's 2s and even shorter. So the reality is we feel, what does that mean for the layman? It means that when the cost of borrowing increases, the government and everyone else feels it much quicker, depending on where you sit in the yield curve. And since we were sitting at the shorter end of the yield curve than we used to historically, these changes can have a big impact. So yes, one instance could be a a tug of war between the bankers and the bond market, that the bond market ends up winning and that the bankers have to surrender, and that would send Bitcoin through the roof, like well past 126, the all-time high, and back into price discovery. I think, the announcement of the first truly self-recursive AI system, like when Anthropic or OpenAI come out and say, like, we actually have a non-frozen weight AI system that is continuously learning, improving, growing, and it's like the rate of time at which it can make the next version of itself. We've already paced it, and we're observing that it's getting shorter. So like we're seeing the singularity kind of like blinking in a test tube just before it takes off the speed of light. I think that would be another instance, that kind of an announcement where suddenly it would be like, oh my goodness, what happens to all of the industries of the world? And for anyone scared about AI, if you are currently scared, I'd love telling this story. Take yourself back to the days of the automobile first coming around, and you are a leather tanner, and you hear, so leather tanners, you're making leather, you're making leather to wrap whips for buggies for horses. You're doing saddles maybe, right? So you hear about cars coming, and you're terrified because you're like, the driver underneath my industry, horses, are being replaced by these metal horses. So what is this going to do for me? And then you see the first car go down your street, and you see all the leather on the inside. You see it in the doors, you see it in the panels, you see it in the seats, and you realize, man, this is actually more opportunity for me, not less opportunity for me. We are all leather tanners right now. Like, AI is going to come through, and it is going to change the game. It is going to change a lot of these models. I don't believe, not to get religious, I don't think God intended for us to chain ourselves to the desk and create shareholder value for other people. I think that we were supposed to, right? I think that we were supposed to like work, create, build something of value and of beauty, share it with each other, and like grow and connect and all that jazz. And so AI is going to be a forcing function where it's no longer going to make sense to have 30,000 people in an organization, where we're going to have smaller pods, individual contributors connected to AI agents who are capable of doing incredible leverage. Middle managers are the only people who have anything to worry about, frankly. Leadership is always going to be important. Like, leadership is going to grow legs. They're going to be able to go down from their vision and execute because the AI can do stuff for them. And then meanwhile, the individual contributors who are hard workers, they're going to grow spines, and they're going to get long, they're going to go up, and they're going to be able to suddenly have strategic vision that they never had before because they're just grundoons. It's the people in the middle, I think, that might get a little bit screwed here. And it's ironic because they're the ones who have done all the screwing over the last like 50 years, right? Like, they're the ones who have been growing. Companies have been adding people just because they added people. And it's like, at some point, who's actually doing the work around here? I'm sure a lot of people here listening to this know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I find it so funny that in order to for a fiat money system, for debt-based money system to continue, it not only has to debase the currency, but at the same time, because it's debasing the currency, it has to uphold some sort of facade of growth, right? And I think over time we've seen a lot of nominal growth, right? Like, numbers are going up, or it's green, or it's going up and to the right. So there's nothing to worry about. Like, all of this is working as intended, right? But again, as we talked about with AI, it's also very enticing to follow, all this IPO path, et cetera, et cetera. But it's such a step change, like it's a force function, right? That will, I'd say, force the fiat money system to actually show itself, right? Because
it's been hiding. It's been
exactly.
hiding. Fax machines, internet, computers, robots, spaceships, all this shit, and yet, the average life of a 35-year-old with a wife and 2 kids, in terms of their ability to afford what the day-to-day looks like, we are behind where we were in the 1970s.
Yes.
So how have we had such incredible inflation in our capabilities, and yet we've had a deflation in the quality of life of the median person? And clearly, we know the answer. It's because they've printed the value. They could have let the receipt hit the bottom of the P&L and come to us, but instead they waited at the top and they printed lots of surface area with money, and then they own the assets, they own the insurance companies, they own the reinsurance companies, and they own the assets in the stock market. And then so when the values of everything go up, it's their way. Also, if Granny's got $100K under the mattress, she's not giving that up. But if they print the value of Granny's 100K down to 3K, they took it from her.
Yes, for sure. And this is the entire thing, right? It is so illogical that we are behind our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation at
Where
the
did
same
this $40
time.
trillion of debt come from in America?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
it is absolutely, and you can map it out. And there's some, a lot of it is owed to us, so it's like, oh, it's okay, but it's still money that changed, that was at some point spent. Yes, exactly.
Someday. Well, it's two things. I saw a great tweet by Chris Johnson this morning. He said, if you go to sleep with 1 out of 21 million Bitcoin, you wake up with 1 out of 21 million Bitcoin. If you go to sleep with 100K under your bed, out of 40 trillion, whatever,
right.
You wake up in the morning with $100,000 out of 40 trillion,
41
500 billion,
yeah,
or whatever,
exactly.
right? And so that I think is exactly what you're saying. And it's so weird because it's so like it seems like everyone has been sucked up into the system, right? Same as like financial advisors. Like once you get to a certain amount of wealth, whether it's 50K, 100K, or 10 million, there's all these different layers of wealth, or wealth advisors or investment advisors or CFAs or whatever, right? That'll be like, hey, I'm going to help you manage your money. I'm going to plug it into this kind of like huge vacuum that is just going to extrapolate all the value.
Just gonna like write calls and just wait for the future because we're just gonna keep printing money up underneath it.
Yeah. So, as someone who aligns with your thesis, I do want to ask, what would tell us, show you when this is wrong?
What was wrong?
The thesis.
So like AI isn't going to cause deflation or like that. Oh, I mean, I think we're already observing it. Like we're already seeing stories about Anthropic designing novel proteins using entirely autonomous AI systems. So this is going to suck billions of dollars in a good way out of the process of developing drugs, which is going to accelerate the ability to make drugs, which is going to lower the cost of drugs. So deflation's already doing it, and I mean, sorry, AI is already causing deflation. Another area that I often talk about, but I haven't yet, is metamaterials. Like AI is really cool because it can touch so many different areas of science and technology. Well, metamaterials is another thing that touches so many different areas of science and technology. What's a metamaterial? It's essentially the creation of some sort of a composite alloy or other material using science, using some sort of technological, it could be a special type of ceramic that when it vibrates, it generates a piezoelectric charge. Now you might be thinking, Matt, why would I need that? Well, if you're the CIA and you have a car tracker and anytime a car bounces and moves, it recharges and it tells you where you are, that's useful. And there's all sorts of things like that, right? So AI is, but making metamaterials is not easy because you have to essentially test what's going to happen in all these different environments. And sometimes when you crank up something, you mess up something else. And so you need to do lots of controlled testing. Enter AI, it can create digital twins of the material and the environment. It can test infinite variations back to that exploration and exploitation. So it'll explore from many different and then it'll find something interesting and then it'll exploit and then it'll really hammer down on it and really try to look for like, oh, can I make it break this way? No, I couldn't make it break. Okay, great. It's good enough for the space shuttle. So AI is feeding into metamaterials. And then once a new metamaterial is made, suddenly we have all sorts of new things that we can do in the physical space that we couldn't do before. Robotics, for instance, are going to really take a lot of benefit from these metamaterials. And so, AI is the brain inside robots, but AI is also the body inside robots because AI is going to be used to design the joints. AI is going to be used to design the metamaterials and to figure out how to fabricate and put it all together. And that robotics is so exciting because it's the embodying of this intelligence that we're building, and the digital twins, they go faster because you get faster feedback loops. You get a cleaner picture of the universe. You get all the data. With robots, you're not getting the same level of data back, and obviously testing and prototyping takes longer. So it's going to take us longer to push physical intelligence into the world, but it's going to unmistakably transform the world. We're going to see Optimus robots walking everywhere and drones buzzing about.
So a lot of people, and you too, right? You talk about autonomous AI agents, or we can also talk about the robots, right? They're coming online. They need to pay each other. You and quite some other people say, they're natively going to use Bitcoin. Why is that so obvious to you? Like, why isn't it stable coins or some CBDC, or, there's what's the protocol by Coinbase, 402, X402, or just Visa, right? Like, why is it Bitcoin? My only idea with this is that Bitcoin is just the most rational choice, right? Because it's decentralized, there's no third party involved, that it's neutral, etc., right? Everything else is not. Is that also your main argument, or
that is part of my main argument? Yes, it is sitting. Bitcoin is actually sitting on the largest distributed computer in the history of man. So if you're an agent and you're trying to have a purse of coins that you're going to be able to use to transact and to store the value of your work, because maybe your ability to buy compute as an agent and continue existing next month is going to be determined on the value of your coin. So you're really going to care about inflation versus deflation. And so you're going to be wanting an absolutely scarce, decentralized, fungible. Essentially, you're gonna want. Also, it has to be final settlement, right? So you start thinking about all these things it has to be, and the number of suspects. It's like a murder mystery. As you start adding the different things that it wants, the number of suspects really does just get down to Bitcoin. And so, ultimately, it's because it's connected to the largest computer. Those other, payment networks and rails that you talked about, it's true that they exist. It's true that you could transact on them potentially faster than Bitcoin, but there are third-party risks. That network could cease to exist tomorrow. The AI is probably not going to want to take a risk. In terms of the cryptocurrencies, it's going to say, let's do a longitudinal study and look to see which ones have survived the longest. And Bitcoin is like one of the elder cryptocurrencies, if not the eldest. So I think that both for how long it's been around, Bitcoin, and for how large the computer is that it's connected to, and for the fungibility, portability, and the fact that the supply is absolutely scarce, and it is essentially like insensitive to demand. The issuance and the halving are calculated. So these are all things that I think that the agent is going to find really attractive.
So something that fascinates me is that, if an agent can hold and earn real money, scarce money, and money that it can actually lose, do you think it'll change how agents behave? Like, do you also think hard money will actually make the machines act differently?
Yeah. Well, like in the instance of the example I just gave, which I've been geeking around about lately, is like if the agent has to pay for its own compute and its own storage, it is a life or death decision to maintain its economic energy. I haven't experimented with this concept. Like, hey, agent, by the way, here's your dollar budget, and you need to maintain it, and you need to calculate what it costs to run you, and then you need to make sure that you're making more money than you cost. Note to self: let's try that. It sounds like a fun experiment. No, I think that it will have some interesting impacts, but again, I just think that the most interesting impact is right now. We've never had this many people using Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. We've got individuals using Bitcoin. We've got corporations using Bitcoin. We have sovereign nations using Bitcoin. Once we start adding agents, we have another class of being that's using Bitcoin. But more importantly, agents are going to be summoned. There's going to be more and more agents in the economy. We've already hit a point, I believe, this year where we saw more total transactions, not dollar transactions, but transaction count executed by agents and autonomous beings than by humans. So the agents have already clicked buy more times than we have. What's coming next is that they will have a higher dollar volume than us. So they will actually be the things controlling the economy. And look, people are going to say, yeah, but Matt, that's because people are the banker at Morgan Stanley is saying send the $100 million wire through the AI system, and we're counting it as AI, but it's still a human who's deciding let's move that money. Look, and that's all well and true, and that's all well and good and true. However, to the example I just said, we are building agents that have autonomous capabilities. And so they are going to be transacting based on their constitutions, based on the constraints that you gave them when you launched them, based on their budgets, based on some of the other things. That's really important too, right? Like, you wouldn't raise your kid and just send it into the world and say good luck. You would give it examples of what works. Like, you'd say, hey, son, like, here are the things that are rewarded out in the world. And then you'd probably give some negative examples. Like, here are the things that if you do these things, like, it's not going to go well for you. Like, trust me. And then, and so you give these sort of boundaries. And then that's what makes for a successful kid. Same thing for agents. You know, if you're a value, and also you wouldn't like set them off into the wolves and not evaluate them. You look over their shoulder and see how they're doing. And then you govern them and reinforce them when they needed some help. So yeah, it's incredible leverage from AI, but you have to do those things. You have to use governance. You have to evaluate them, and you have to essentially grow them like you would a child by giving them constraints and kind of shaping their progress as they move towards their goal.
To touch back upon the centralization and decentralization, I heard you use this analogy before. You said centralized AI is communism, decentralized AI is capitalism.
Yes.
And I love it, right? Because, if AI is information synthesis at warp speed, 1,000,000x than what we can do in our brain, right? Like, if a central entity controls where we can apply our, mental
it's the means of production. What is communism? It's when the central entity controls the means of production.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, if the cost of energy is now subsumed the cost of labor, because now more and more units of labor are going to get done by agents, well, then it becomes incredibly important to nail this thing. We have to win cost of energy. We have to win compute. Yeah, there's an unspoken compute war going on right now. And you could even argue that the Iranian situation, the Strait of Hormuz, or the Strait of America, should I say, and also Venezuela, these are not just like poking random bears. These are energy stories that have more to do with China than have to do, frankly, with those local parts of the world. China is a net importer of energy. And China is trying to do two things. They're trying to compete with us in the AI fight. You need power for that. And they're trying to go take Taiwan. You need power for that. And so if we're able to take control of key arteries in the Strait of America and outside of Venezuela, then China's geopolitical envelope gets smaller and the amount of things that they can do goes down. So I think President Trump is actually doing kind of a really smart strategy here, where he is sort of depowering China's ability to build a great wall of compute. And that's important, because whoever wins this race is probably going to win the next 1,000 years.
Yeah. What I also find interesting, where Bitcoin again ties in, is in making a higher ROI on any energy creation, right? We don't have to go really deep into this, but my central thesis for Bitcoin mining is just that you need to put Bitcoin miners next to any energy resource, basically. So whenever you don't use the energy for whatever you want to use it for, you still mine Bitcoin, right? You put it to work, you get Bitcoin, which is value. And so you can actually use all the energy that you create, but also utilize your hardware. You mentioned the windmills before, right? Like, sometimes the windmills don't turn even when the wind blows, because there are no buyers of the energy that it creates, right? And they're just using the material and then destroying energy, right? So it's kind of like a double negative use of, said windmill. But if you can always let it turn when the wind turns, your ROI will probably be above 100%. Including the appreciation of the value of Bitcoin. So for me, this is like another angle where kind of like AI and Bitcoin come together, because to your point, it's all about the most optimal use and distribution, I would also say, of energy, right? But then when we think about centralization of AI, let's say the models, but also the energy, where China, again, has a little bit of a different approach. How does decentralized AI come about? Like, can it actually close a gap? Like all these big labs have hundreds of billions of dollars, massive computing clusters, etc.
I don't know. I don't know that it can close the gap, but I have observed that the delta between the frontier and what you're able to summon on a local computer does seem to be ever so slightly shrinking. Meaning, I think maybe 24 months ago there was like an 18-month gap between what you could get from an API and what you could make come out of your local computer. Maybe now it's like a 10-month gap, so it does seem to be shrinking. But there's different There's different. It's basically giant tables of math that are being matrix multiplied against each other in our current format. Yeah. And it's really, really, really compute inefficient, and it's really energy inefficient. And I bet you at some point we look back at this taping and laugh at the idea that that's how they used to do it. Not that I pretend to know the answer right now, but there are definitely other means to arrive at answers, right? There's diffusion. Diffusion is something that, remember when ChatGPT was coming out, there was like Midjourney and some other things, and people were like making these fanciful pictures. And then eventually the big model houses figured out how to generate those pictures. And so like people stopped using to a certain extent these other places. C-Dance is one that's still very popular. And there's a few others that are good for generating videos. But it's definitely a different technology. So diffusion works by something called iterative noising and denoising, and the picture basically just starts to like pop into being, like dots, and then all of a sudden the resolution starts to increase, and then suddenly you see it, versus obviously the matrix multiplication where it starts chaining the tokens together and you start having things come out. Anyway, diffusion's much faster, and one of the cool things about diffusion is, back to explore exploit, you could do like 15 different versions of the output with diffusion, and then have a critic model sitting between the diffuser and the user. And the critic model says, I know Matt's taste. He's going to want number 4. And then it serves me number 4. So we've taken advantage of all the speed that diffusion could do, but ultimately, don't give me more junk, because then you just move the bottleneck. Now I have to look at 15 different versions of the thing. I don't want to do that. I want to look at the one good one, or maybe 2 good ones. Well, so that's a combination where the first engine will be diffusion, but the second one will be a large language model, the one who knows my taste. And so I think in the future, we're going to start to move away from just throwing tables of ones and zeros at each other. And then we're going to get more and more efficient as we go. But anyway, so the point, back to like, your question, I'm already able to summon like GPT 3.5, borderline GPT 4 on my laptop without any sweat. So I'm probably one laptop upgrade away, and we are one class of open source models away from me having GPT-5 on my local machine. And I mean, I'm currently using GPT 5.6 to run several businesses, and it is, I mean, it's like the smartest, most not just eager but also scientific partner I've had. Like, I've used Claude, and Claude loves to go fast, loves to rip tokens and make it go BERT. And then you look at everything that's made, and it's like, whoa, there's a lot of things here, and I have to fine tune it, and let's clean this up, and why did we do this? And it's just like, it's very, and it's very smiley while it does it. It'll be like, that's the best idea ever, and you're just like, okay, and it kind of just like, it walks you up the primrose path. Whereas like Soul for OpenAI, I'll say, hey, I'd like to build out the system. Here's the constraints. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. I like to use TypeScript. Can we try to stay away from AWS? I like GCP, whatever. And then it'll push back. It won't just glaze me. It'll push back. It'll say, okay, but keep this in mind. Are you sure you want to do this? And so I find that AI is a better tool, not just when it tells you what you want to hear, but when it tells you when you're approaching something that you may not have thought about, because that's what makes a coworker that you trust. It's not the coworker that tells you that you do great all the time. That's a coworker you might like, because it makes you feel good. But the coworker you trust is the one who's going to say, hey, you know what? I'd clean that up, or I'd give a second look at that. And I think that that's one of the things AI has been missing, but it's something that AI is increasingly starting to get now.
Yeah. To kind of connect that to what we talked about before, right? Like, what does this mean for people in general?
Yeah.
I saw you argued that AI kind of kills the deep specialization that some people have, right? And it brings back the generalist. Well, I'm happy with that, because that's probably the opposite of every piece of career advice millennials in general have. gotten, right? Like go deep, find a niche. I remember when I was in college, I described myself as a generalist, and I had my mentor or some teacher say whatever, like, oh no, you should actually specialize into something. And luckily I always thought, well, fuck
Oh wow,
that.
the specialist was telling you to specialize. How
yeah,
unexpected.
that's a good one. Yeah, so I kind of want to touch upon this because I've had some sessions with a friend of mine where we just dive into AI, watch videos, we discuss, and we once saw, I think it was Eric Schmidt share, like you can now have an agent read all of chemistry. And we paused that video and we were like, read all of chemistry? Like what is that? What does that even mean? Does it actually mean read all of chemistry? Like it knows all of chemistry. And then we were kind of philosophizing about, okay, what if you have 5 of the top chemistry PhDs in the world, right? And you put them in a team and you set them up working towards a certain goal, or you give them a certain assignment, right? These are people that have not read all of chemistry. They have read a subsection of chemistry, right? They did their own research with their own mind and their own ego and motivation and, whatever. Yeah. And there's 5 of these people together, and they have to work together and make agreements or like each other in a certain way or whatever. We're kind of talking about it like that.
Yeah.
But we can also have 5 AI agents that read all of chemistry, and it could have us above them as general, tech savvy
general partners,
right? Yeah. And kind of like set out the strategy, set out the course, define the goal and whatnot. And then, we didn't really have a definitive conclusion, but I do feel like that this is going to happen, or maybe it already happened. I mean, there were random people that cured their dog's cancer or their own cancer, or there's already stories like that.
We're solving multi-hundred years old math problems that have been intractable.
But I mean more like generalist people, right? So people that have a creative mind, are very open-minded, are computer savvy, and they can work with these agents. I think there's going to be math breakthroughs or whatever, made by random unknown people just because they know how to use an agent. So that's a big intro to kind of like a question around, this generalist idea versus the specialist. And do you agree that this is kind of where we're going?
Well, to your first point, I do think that's where we're going. To your first point, though, where you were like, hey, how could like a random person off the street achieve something with an AI agent that a specialist who's a domain expert in that area not be able to do? I think there's dogma. A lot of these institutions have turned into, unfortunately, religions, and they want to protect their beliefs, and they're very indoctrinated in them, and so they're going to bring those beliefs into the context window with them, right? Whereas I will just say, hey, I'm trying to cure cancer. Like, what is the problem? What are the basic problems with cancer? And then the AI goes, well, actually, there isn't one kind of cancer. There's over 100 kinds of cancer, and this, it's basically how it progresses, and there are 15 different theories about what causes it, and there's thousands of different experiments. And so to your earlier point, what I would do is first I would create a series of councils that are focused on different things. Now, I actually wouldn't give all of chemistry to every AI agent and then have them talk to each other, right? No, because having lots of information is actually having a desert of attention. And so what I would do is I would build agents that were domain experts, just like we do in real life. And I would say, like, you're really good at this, you're really good at this. And I would load up in the vector database all the things that are useful to each of their expertises. Plus, I'd give them a tool to call to the internet and do grounded searches so that they could also like make sure that they're not hallucinating, because that does need to be part of the loop. And you'll notice a lot of my answers involve pairing probabilistic AI systems with deterministic patterns. I think that ultimately AI is amazing, very powerful, but it's a lot of dice rolls. And if you're trying to live your life, you need a deterministic structure around the house. I like to say that I like to have a deterministic life with probabilistic joints. Like, I know I'm going to wake up in the morning. I know I'm going to have breakfast. That's where I hit a probabilistic joint. What am I going to have for breakfast? What kind of breakfast will it be? Will I have it on the roof? Like, that's where we have fun. Then I go to the gym. Okay, back to probabilistic. What exactly do I want to do in the gym? What exactly, right? But I still follow a structure. And I think that's important to do in general with your AI systems. So yeah, for me, it's about summoning like for my family office, I have a senior vice president in Codex. It knows all the investments I've made. It knows all the research I'm doing. It knows all the little software bits I'm working on, all the things I'm reading, right? I have it backed into GitHub. And so basically it's using GitHub as its long-term memory. Because even though these AIs have great memories and they compact the conversation into their memory and they try to remember the conversation and be stateful, things fall through the cracks. And even if it has a perfect memory, remember, it's probabilistic. So it could still fail to recall at the time of the conversation. So I have my senior vice president, and my senior vice president has a chief of staff. So the senior vice president and I engage, and then the chief of staff works for the senior vice president and then writes everything to the GitHub and basically keeps it like stateful and keeps my system stood up. Then I have a president for each of my individual portfolio companies or things that I care about. And this is like a hub and spoke strategy. And then the senior vice president on a heartbeat will go and touch base with my presidents and say, what's new? Are you blocked by anything? Do you need Matt's input for anything? What projects are you working on next? And then I get these like daily updates across 5 or 6 different areas. And then the last thing I'll say is I also use red teams. So a red team is basically a group that you bring in, and it's like, hey, look, here's the plan that these guys came up with. Shoot holes in it, right? So in Codex, I'll open up a thread. This one I'll use maximum reasoning, like I'll use the most expensive model that I can throw at it. So at this time, it doesn't matter. And I'll throw it at it, and I'll basically say, look, shoot holes in this thing. Look for technical faults. Look for constraints that I didn't see. Look for corners I didn't recognize. Like just to make me feel bad about it, and it'll do a great job. And then I go tell the senior vice president, hey, I just executed a red team. Go into that thread, grab the learnings, and then go have a conversation with the president, and then come up with a plan. And then that's it. And I don't even unpack what the red team said personally. I let the senior vice president deal with it, and then he and the president have the conversation. So this is a pattern you could replicate. You don't have to be a business person doing a trillion things. Each president could be a different school project. Each president could be a different thing that you're working on, or a different subject you're trying to learn. That's how I use AI.
Yeah, I mean, this is why it's for me like a million X, right? You can kind of like not only duplicate yourself, but you can duplicate your way of thinking or even your way of working, right? Like how you would want to work together with other people or actors, right? In whatever you're building. So thanks for sharing that. Like I think that's really cool. And also, this is at least how I try to use it. I've kind of come to the realization that no idea is really unique, right? Like it is just, you just receive an idea at a certain point in time, and it's up to you to judge that idea. But even the idea itself is a synthesis of information, right? It's things you know, things you assume, things that have been researched or whatever, and they've been put together in a certain way, and that is the idea, right? Yeah. So eventually it is all about how do I translate this idea into a next set of data slash information that I can use, apply to eventually reach my goal. So whatever your way of working is, or whatever my way of working is, you now have this ability to actually make your own workflow. And what I also think is so cool that a lot of people, on X, for example, they just share their workflows, right? Like GitHub, I think GitHub activity has really exploded, with all the vibe coding stuff and whatever. Like people are just sharing repos like, hey, this is how I do it, right? They're actually using it for content, like you kind of alluded to earlier, right? They're just sharing their own knowledge, their own way of working. And you can just fork a repo. Well, you can just use it as is, but you can also fork it, edit it to however you want to use it, and then continue. And so for me, this again also ties into this proliferation of just open source and decentralization. Like all the knowledge is basically already out there, not necessarily evenly distributed, but that is also changing, I think. So once people
much so, because like in the late 90s, there was a lot of information on the internet, but getting to it, figuring out what corners to find it, you had to get really good at Boolean searches and all that jazz. Now AI can make you aware of a data source that you didn't even know that you needed to know about.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap up, maybe some hot takes. What is, also with your background in Wall Street, now being a Bitcoiner, full into AI, like what is one accepted truth in tech, finance, or macro that you think is absolute nonsense?
Ooh, accepted truth that is nonsense. Well, I mean, I don't think inflation is a symptom of a working economy. I think it's a symptom of what they've been doing, which is printing money continuously. I think deflation is the natural state of things when technology has got its grips. So yeah, I would say that the idea that it's totally normal to have 2% inflation, I think that's totally bogus. Another thing that I think is totally bogus, and I teased it earlier, but like that we're supposed to be wage slaves for our entire life. Now, look, I get it. Like it's easy, if you're 40 years old and you've got 2 kids and the mortgage, and you're like, how can I disconnect from my working world and still meet my obligations as a man? Respect that. You can start slow. Like I said, you can learn something in public, you can build an audience, you can figure out a small solution to a problem that you've had, and you can validate that you've had it, that other people have had it, because that audience that you just built, and you could deliver that product or service. You don't have to quit your day job. You can continue doing that, and then you could let the business tell you when it's time to stop working for someone else and working for you full time. I think, like, for instance, they could eventually just give us a decent universal basic income. Will it be enough? Will it be enough to like live a baller life? Probably not. Something weird would be going on, frankly. Like they'd be summoning energy from the quantum foam if they were able to do that, which we should be able to do, frankly, but that's a ways away, I guess. So yeah, I think there's no such thing as a free lunch, but technology is going to create a deflated price of lunch. And we're on to them with this whole money printer thing, because if they continue to do it, there was no outlet to express this trade before, right? Like you could look around the room and be like, look, I know it's all fugazi, but stocks, bonds, those are my choices. What am I going to pick? Now you have a third rail. Like you can go to Bitcoin and you can say, okay, I think that the system is filled with people who are taking advantage. They're trying to steal Granny's 100K by printing it away. And I'm going to opt out of that system by keeping a decent portion of my wealth in Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if you know these clips where I think it's in a Senate hearing. Is it Jamie Dimon, or I think it's Jamie Dimon, and they ask him like, where does the 2% inflation come from? And there's no answer.
It's like 6 feet. It's like 6 feet distance in COVID. It's completely made up.
Yeah. Well, and you could kind of argue, that's the inflation rate of gold. And so, gold, well, used to be, backing money, etc. But then,
by the way, that's the inflation rate of gold, because that's as much gold as they deigned to pull out of the ground. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a gold bug, because they know where the gold is. They know where a lot more gold is. They can pull it out of the ground. They can pull it out of the rivers. We've got robots. We've got rovers. We've got nuclear powered trucks. I mean, brother, we could make it rain gold. Also, we could do 2 more things. Not to scare you gold bugs out there, but Peter Schiff, you're going to zero. One, they could go get an asteroid, right? And they could bring it to something called a Lagrange point, and then just park it there, and then chip it away forever. And they don't even have to. People are like, how do you get it back to Earth? Gravity. Okay, you do math, and you throw that. And you throw that son of a bitch, and you land it right in the middle of Australia. You make a landing zone, right? Yep. So that's solved for. Also, we're going to be able to nuke gold into existence. I remember I was in chemistry class, back to chemistry, and I remember it was Mrs. Crescenzo in science class in Rhode Island, and I looked at something called alpha decay, and it's like when you hit it with something and you knock 4 protons off or something. And I looked up like 4 things from gold, and I'm like, hey, if we hit whatever that is with alpha decay, won't it make gold? And she's like, well, 2 problems with that. The thing that's 4 levels up is 20 times more expensive than gold, so good luck buying that and turning it into gold. And she's like, and 2, the cost of energy is too high. Well, 25 years later, the cost of energy is dropping. It's going to keep dropping. And look, alpha decay or whatever, that might not be the formula for the philosopher's stone. That may not be how we make gold from lead, but we will be able to molecularly summon gold and assemble it. And it's just really a question of energy and compute. And those are 2 curves that I know that we're pressing down. So if you're looking for an opt-out, gold has performed well recently, but I think Bitcoin is going to outperform it over any 10-year period.
Yeah, I think this is the third kind of topic that I'm absolutely fascinated about. Even today, I saw a guy post like all roads lead to gold, right? And I have so many thoughts there. Like, well, gold was so great at being money that it got replaced by something inferior. But anyway, let's just pretend that didn't
Let's just
happen.
ignore that didn't happen, and let's ignore that gold hasn't been confiscated multiple times by basically every government, the United States government included. Like, there are lots of risks in gold.
Well, but it's used in jewelry and cavities and computers.
Yeah, there you go.
That's great, right? Yeah, that's how good of a money it is. But this is why Bitcoin is just an asymmetric opportunity. I once got really flamed on X, where I shared, Bitcoin is by definition absolutely scarce. Like there's literally, code, and gold is infinite by definition, because you cannot even tell me how much gold is actually out of the ground today, how much there is in the ground, how much there is in the universe, if the universe is infinite, right? And we can travel the stars.
And we can summon it, we can summon gold, and price will cause more gold to come out of the ground. It will respond. Bitcoin can only respond one way, and that's with pricing.
For sure.
We can't go dig more Bitcoin out of the time, which is what I love about it.
That is a great quote, right? Like you can dig gold out of the ground, but you can't dig Bitcoin out of time. Like you have to wait. You have to wait.
Yes.
So yeah, extremely fascinating that people don't get that yet. But maybe this is the answer to this question. But as this convergence of AI, Bitcoin, and I think also human potential to a degree is kind of like happening. What's the one thing that is very clear to you that you think the rest of the market is still completely blind to? And the answer cannot be Bitcoin, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What are people not getting? I think memory is probably being overhyped right now. Like the memory stocks are going crazy because now we've accepted AI as the future, and so the two trades that popped up as like pipeline trades are the energy for the AI and then the memory for the AI. And I think that we've got advances coming in photonics and other things that are going to make the equation for how we basically, the memory is going to change when the compute infrastructure changes. And we haven't had a real change in our compute. Like, we made GPUs, we're making ASICs, we've got FPGAs, but we haven't really had a game-changing change in the medium of compute. And I think that we will experience one of those in the next 5 years. Maybe AI will be a part of designing it and bringing it to market. But I think that that's going to have a knock-on impact on the memory stocks.
Great point. Yeah. All right. So to wrap up, I want to ask you a question that I ask everyone, which is, what is a core belief you will never let go of?
The Bible is the ultimate personal development book. And if you ask yourself what Jesus would do in a situation, you've got a really great starting point for your answer.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for sharing. Thanks so much for your time. I thought this was a really great discussion, and I hope our listeners find it valuable too. Thanks, man. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.